There we go. We should be broadcasting live. I can see the attendees floating in as we go, populating very quick. Very nice to see everyone today. Thank you for joining this third ChaiTime webinar. For those of you who may be new to the ChaiTime series, it is usually held on a Friday, 3 p.m. BST. Today we're doing it a day early because of the revised UK bank holiday. So hello from Thursday. The ChaiTime webinars provide us with an informal opportunity to ask questions and learn from a panel of experts on a different topic. And over the past 2 weeks, when we've been running these sessions, we've welcomed attendees from 17 different countries. Well, I've got some friends dialing in from South Korea today, so hello to those guys. Brings it up to 18 different countries at least. And we've learned about lots, including 2 weeks ago, Sunil talked about what investment's going to look like in a post-COVID-19 environment. Last week, Prashant was teaching us how to innovate from our sofa. This week's focus is going to be on technology. Now, I know that many of you who know O2h may associate us with ventures and biotech, but actually our technology group, which is 50 people strong now, has been in operation since 2016. During that time, we've launched 3 products and we work with clients on many, many other projects as well. So actually, me and the tech team, we're always going through the process of sort of looking at building and scaling tech businesses, which is something that we have in common with our attendees and something that we have in common with our panel as well, which is why I thought this would be a really good topic for this week's webinar. And for those of you who may know Sunil and Prashant, their very first business was a tech business. I'll let them tell you a little bit about that, or maybe Ray can tell you a little bit about that, who was involved in that as well. So O2h was built on very strong tech fundamentals. But without further ado, I'm Craig. I lead the technology group at O2h. I built my own technology business 5 years ago, so I've been around the block a few times. And today I'm joined by a number of great business leaders in the tech space who are going to be telling us their own stories. They're going to be providing us with some good tips on managing fundraising, scaling a tech business, future planning, with the ultimate goal of helping all of you guys build your own tech businesses. To start with then, I'll hand it over to our panel now. If you could just each introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your company, and maybe just tell us a little bit about how you first became interested in tech. That would be great. Ray, would you be happy to kick us off?
Yeah, happy to do that. So I'm Ray Anderson. I was the CEO of Bango for 20 years, believe it or not, up until about the end of 2019. I'm now the Executive Chair of Bango. I'll probably explain a bit more about my intro to tech and then take you into Bango. I mean, my first passion in tech was really when I was in the early 70s, when I used to like making board games, believe it or not. And I got very interested in Star Trek, which had just arrived in the sort of late 60s, I suppose. And I was a youngster watching Star Trek, and I wanted to make some sort of Star Trek battle simulation. So I ended up using a school timeshare computer. And then I increasingly had to get more interested in building my own computers and all sorts of things like that to make my Star Trek games come to life. And off I went and ran a series of businesses from that point on, mainly at Cambridge University and outside that and so on. Bango dates back to about the year 2000 when a couple of us had this idea that the internet would come out to mobile phones, sort of stimulated by the idea of 3G network licenses and things like that. Sounded suicidal at the time because, first of all, everyone told us that mobile phones had tiny screens, no keyboard, and the internet was really shitty. It was about the same speed as SMS messages, so that was about rubbish. And the other problem was that the PC internet world had just exploded with the dot-com bust in 2000. So if internet was never going to work on PCs, there's absolutely no hope in hell it'll ever work on mobiles. So Bango came to life in that era, very contrarian, saying that there will be services available over the internet to mobile phones and people will want to buy them. So we're going to try and help people pay money for them. And the idea was that, you know, if you couldn't make money on your PC services, and you couldn't get shareholders to spend all their money keeping you alive, we'll help you do something on the mobile world. So Bango over those 20 years has gone through helping, I suppose, individual merchants like our early customers were people like Mystic Meg for the Sun, or The Simpsons, or music providers, various other people like that, Universal Music, and then lots of what I would call erotic content providers, let's call them, in the early 2000 to 2005 era. We then floated the company on AIM to raise some money to go into the American market. We got quite successful in the UK. And then things changed a lot in the late sort of 2007, 8, 9 period. Along came the iPhone, obviously. And therefore we ended up switching over to powering the app stores rather than the app developers themselves. And then more recently, we've actually gone back to the app developers, who actually are the people who make all the money. And we're starting to help the app developers not only collect payments, but also find out who's paying so they can focus their marketing more effectively. So that's my what I'm doing now. My day job is Bango. You know, a lot of angel investments, and also a lot of help with friends and things who are setting up companies alongside Bango, or various adventures in the past.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Ray. I think many of us were inspired by Star Trek, so I did love hearing that story. Perhaps you could tell us, Mark, then about how you first got interested in tech and how you got started with Deepmatter.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. So my name is Mark Warne. I'm Chief Executive of Deepmatter Group. We're an AIM-listed company digitizing chemistry with the intention of using a combined software and hardware-based platform to collect, structure, and analyze contextually data coming out from laboratories to improve the productivity and discovery of process and research chemists. I've been chief executive of the business since June 2018. Prior to that, I actually had 10 years investing with IP Group, where we were looking really at how digital technologies could ultimately reshape and reform the healthcare industry. And I think what you see with Deepmatter is those sort of principles, the idea of ubiquitous collection of streams of sensor data combined with contextual know-how of what individuals or instruments or machines are doing around the lab, being used, or being used in healthcare environment, being used in now a lab-based environment, which really hasn't changed in 200 years. So it's how do you take an old world environment which can really be transformed in terms of its productivity and discovery, and use these cloud-based and sensor-based, low-cost sensor-based platforms to disrupt an industry. In my quieter hours, I'm also a non-exec at IXI PLC, which is digitizing data associated with neuroscience and a clinical trials business called Overthink.
Thank you very much. So from one SciTech to another SciTech, Camille, perhaps you can tell us about how you and Peptone got started.
Oh yes, thank you so much. I'm a physicist. I started with my journey with physics actually from a paper when I was 17 on artificial intelligence. I was really in the baby steps, analyzing objects. My interest is in proteins that don't fold. So contrary to what headlines are, what major outlets, scientific outlets write about protein folding and AI, I'm actually excited about proteins that hypothetically are supposed to fail. These are called disordered proteins. And actually all the research which surrounds these proteins, because I mean, I don't believe that you can actually model protein folding without understanding why proteins misfold or stay unfolded. And this actually set us on a very long journey with a fellow physicist and colleagues at Peptone into building a company which actually tries to understand why protein experiments, protein pharmaceutical experiments fail. So even if we have no chance of actually simulating folding, because let's be honest, even the best methods like AlphaFold fail, what can we do to understand why actually this happens? And this is actually the founding idea of Peptone. So trying to understand why things fail. And if things fail, and pharma and science is based on failure, how much would you pay if we could tell you that you're going to fail and you're going to fail very quickly so that you can move on to the next project, or essentially have a peace of mind that there's nothing more that can be done on the protein family that you work with. So we believe in the kind of harmonious synthesis of machine learning, which allows us to connect physical concepts, which we simply don't understand because they have a different measure, different dimensionality, different units even, and the physics. So basically going back to 30 amazing years of research at University of Groningen, Cambridge, Stanford in protein physics, and saying, look, you don't need more data. You just need to go back in a history and see what people have done, very brilliant people, and connect it together. And that's basically what Bautin is. So that's essentially where we're headed.
Thank you very much. Nice, concise. That's what we like. Fiona, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how you got started with Repositive.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to start with how I got interested in tech, because it's a good story. My grandfather, he was the first person that I knew of who had a website. So my grandfather, he had a website back in the day before there was any web hosting in Denmark. So he had a website hosted on a US server. And when I was, I don't know, 8 years old, maybe 8, around that age, he put me on his lap and showed me how to program games in BASIC, when you could type up the code from this magazine and then you could make it happen on the screen. And I thought that was really cool. And ever since, I found programming really easy, so it was an obvious choice when it came to choosing what to do as a study after school. So how did Repositive get started? So Repositive is, yes, a tech business, but we're very much into life sciences. We are helping accelerate oncology research. So we act as a facilitator for the service providers of translational cancer models to help them put their inventory description online in a way that data is browsable, searchable, standardized, so that researchers who are looking to test the next new drug compound, they can find the right cancer model to test for. So we're offering a service both to the service providers with cancer models and to the researchers who are seeking to find the right cancer models to do their tests. And yeah, we've been in existence for some time, and unlike other businesses in this COVID times, biopharma and CEOs are very much still up and running. So we have our hands full at the moment.
That's great news. Good to hear your entryway into tech as well. Mirrors my own entryway, which was using a Commodore 64 to program my own games. So very, very similar. I like it. And finally, Max, you're from a fund, different from our other panelists. So how did you get started?
Well, I guess my love for technology stems back to not even so much my education. I'm sadly an economist, so I can't really claim anything on that front. But my first job was actually a mobile operator startup. Was sort of employee number 10 in a company which had a license and a bunch of cash and equipment, and we sort of built it into a regional player. And I sort of had that first-hand experience over the first 3 years of building something from nothing. And of course, because it's not a particularly risky business, even though it has its own challenges, it felt like it was very rewarding and almost felt easy. And then I got involved with 3 other companies of that nature. And before I came to Cambridge and started working in venture capital, thinking that I could, I sort of knew how to do that. And then I spent the next 5 years learning why I didn't actually. So, and yeah, that's sort of how I got into tech or tech investing in the first place. And then again, starting the business was relatively easy because my co-founders and I just more or less had a kick in the butt, where we realized that the company that we were working for at the time wasn't really the right platform, and we had little option but to go and set up on our own. And the funding environment was starting to get more positive, sort of back in 2006. So so that's when we set up IQ Capital, and now we are still a relatively small player in the global sense, but we have about 400 million that we are investing in deep tech companies at seed and Series A stage to start with, and then helping them scale and achieve exits in due course.
It's fantastic news. First time I've heard somebody apologize for being an economist. So good.
Well, you know, I have to peg myself to physicists and computer scientists and, you know, people doing the properly hard things, you know, well, as much as I like economics, I mean, it's slightly different science.
Absolutely. Great stuff. So we talked a little bit about how your businesses came about. Obviously, the goal of today's webinar is to really help people found and grow their own businesses. Last week, we talked a lot about innovation, where inspiration comes from and how you formulate ideas. So the question I'd like to pose to you guys is, what were the first steps you took in getting the business up and running? Ray, your business has been in operation for a very long time. Perhaps you can tell us how Bango first came to be back in, was it the year 2000?
Yeah, it was late. It was in the 1999 sort of era. So I'd just come off the back of we effectively taken a company, started about early 90s, merged it with a Californian company, and then floated it on NASDAQ, and then that had gone on to be quite big, you know, $1 billion+ valuation. And I was looking to basically leave and wondering what to do. I'd done a lot of various angel investments through actually the very early days of Cambridge Angels and before that. And someone, actually a guy called Steve Ives, showed me, he said, "Can I just show you something, Ray?" And he drew two diagrams on the back of an envelope. One was the curve of the uptake of mobile phones from 94 till 1999, which meant there were hundreds of millions of mobile phones. And then another curve, which was the uptake of the mobile web, which was 93 through to 99. And he said, what happens if those two came together? Now, his idea was he was trying to get me to invest money in a company to build an operating system based on Linux for mobile phones. Ring a bell, Android, anybody? But it was about 10 years premature. But it nagged me a lot, that idea. And I'd missed the boat in 93, 94 when I'd shipped the first ever web browser. We did a deal with Mark Andreessen when he was at NCSA. And then I was persuaded, largely through being successful and getting a lot of money and be able to buy an aeroplane and things, that it wasn't worth fighting Microsoft because they would make sure the web never existed. And I was a bit cornered. I thought, no, I've got to, this is going to happen. I've got to start a company. So I got together with another guy who had started a company with, Anil Malhotra. We said, we've got to start a company in this internet comes to mobile world. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but let's start one. And after various ideas, we came up with this idea that let's help people make money on the mobile internet when this thing, if this thing ever came about. So I think this pressure to do something was the stimulus of the innovation, and plus some ideas come in from outside. And I think innovation has to be driven by pressure and being cornered, being forced to innovate. So, wartime is a great time for innovation, I guess. Pandemic viruses cause a lot of innovation, things like that. So if you're in a business and you want to get people to innovate, you can't put them in a comfortable part of the business and say innovate. You've got to give them some severely hard problems that can't be solved, preferably not much money, and say you've got to solve those problems quickly. Then you'll stimulate a bit of innovation. And I think shortage of money, shortage of time, but bright brains who are able to sort of look around for ideas is the way I would say innovation is stimulated. And maybe some people stimulate innovation by having a time, lying on the beach for a few months. I don't know, but it's never come about in my world by that. It's just you're forced to innovate to get your way out of a box, effectively.
Absolutely. So we talked about the early days and how it was almost data-driven decisions to find the market opportunity, which led to the creation of Bango. Camille, you spoke about how the problem that Peptone is trying to solve is about identifying failure quicker. Was that a data-driven decision that led to the creation of Peptone?
No, that's actually not. And in fact, it was a pivot for the whole company. I mean, the question, I mean, all of you fine members of this webinar, I mean, also to the audience, I mean, if you ever been exposed to academic education, you always face a problem of failure. Actually, failure is embraced in academia, yes? We plan an experiment, it fails. And if you have a aha moment, say, hey, actually, I could write 5 papers just out of this failed experiment. It's so exciting. I planned something that it doesn't work. Well, industry doesn't work that way. Pharma industry doesn't work that way. In pharma, you get penalized for failure. Now, we are living in the times, and sadly, I have to bring, Craig, I have to go back to the coronavirus kind of thing. We are actually under tremendous pressure. Every pharma company is under pressure to deliver. But the delivery is once again deeply rooted in a scientific discovery process, which is based on failure. So now the question is, how much can you fail? How quickly can you fail? And pharma companies are failing not because they want to. They fail because their process, the scientific process, demands a failure. Yes, that's why we screen for things we simply don't understand. So now the question is, what type of technologies do we have today, not tomorrow, not in 10 years, today, that could assist in spotting, identifying failure, and most importantly, mitigating the biggest problem AI faces, and that's the lack of data. So what can you do today if client comes to you with 50 data points and says, look, we made 50 variants of this protein and we can't do more. We don't have money, we don't have time. Is there anything we can do with this 50 failed data points? And there's a part of drug development process, which is called developability, where when you find a molecule, it has to pass a variety of tests before anybody would even consider an animal model. And we believe, and we have evidence that you can connect lots of the sparse experimental data with physical reality simulations and help our clients to understand why they fail. So A, they can abandon failing projects, or identify more plausible scenarios which hopefully mitigate the failure. And that's exactly the founding idea. But truth to be told, and I just want to be very clear, this fit wasn't absolutely evident to us. It was a journey by talking to scientists, talking to clients, as being a physicist, discovering pharma world and discovering the kind of value chain and where we can contribute. So it was, if I may say something, fundamental for us was ability to go to a clients and very carefully talk to them and listen. And they were generous enough actually to talk back. And that's how we refine further what actually is our company about. What is all this tech we've been developing? What could it be used for?
So personal pain, market research, speaking with your colleagues, wondering why people have been banging their head against a brick wall for so long. And that's
absolutely. Look, like there's the misconception of pharma being horrible and inefficient. But these are our peers from University of Cambridge, Groningen. These are our colleagues. They're brilliant scientists. They're not horrible. There's no force. All of them want to innovate. Yeah. Intrinsically, the problem is it's really difficult. It's really difficult, and there are so many variables that go wrong. It's a chain of events which leads to catastrophe. The question is, if you know there's a fracture, even small fracture on the airplane engine, you will never let it fly. You'll never let it go. And in pharma, you know, there are sometimes no mechanism of control of this sort. And the question is, what could we do with existing modern technology and the science that is out there to help these guys to sometimes put the brakes and say, look, this is not going to work. Or look, we optimized enough this molecule. Science doesn't have a better option for us. It's done. We have to move on. How much money would this save? You see? Absolutely. And that's exactly one of the first deliverables and masters we have for clients, a very tangible one, telling them you've done enough. That's it. There's nothing more that can be done. Why? Well, that's science. Yeah. So at least that's the goal we are working towards too.
Absolutely. It's you're selling into a similar market, Fiona. Where did the idea of Repositive come from?
So Repositive has been on a bit of a journey, because originally I founded the company because of my frustration as a researcher that you need data to make decisions, you need data to analyze, and data to reduce the bias in your conclusions, and especially in a field like genomics, which is my background in bioinformatics, you need as much data as possible in order to draw when I realized that it was not just me as an individual, but it was every single person doing research in genomics had a similar issue. Later found out it was an even broader issue in research in general, that the data is not necessarily available, even though everybody needs it. And even if it is in existence, it's not necessarily available. So I thought there's somebody who needs to act as a facilitator in between those who have data and those who need data to make it easier to access the right data to speed up the research. And when we started Repositive, we were looking very broadly and found out that getting a business model up and running is difficult. So we had to pivot to focus on where we had the commercial traction, which was specifically in the oncology and the preclinical oncology cancer models. And since we pivoted to focus on that area, we found that within that area of research, those who have the data, they have also the right interest and motivation to make it available to those who want it, because it's the way that the providers are connecting with their potential customers. So we help those providers make the data easy to search, make it standardized, make it curated, so they can trust the data to make the decisions of which models to use. So my whole motivation came from a personal frustration of not being able to do my research fast enough. And I want to see research succeed. I want to see cancer treatments getting to patients faster. And then when you find the niche in market where they need that particular, from personal skill set, but from a company perspective, the capacity, the capability to organize the data and make it searchable and available. And we found our niche where there's a need. And I can only repeat what Camilla said. It's all about listening to find the right niche where it also works commercially, is about listening to those customers. And when they say, actually, what is really bothering us is how to get access to this data, then we were picking up our ears and, oh, this is the data we should help them get access to, because this is where the problem lies.
On this note, Fiona, I mean, like for us, clients coming to us and telling us, okay, science is great, like we buy it. Can you make a drag and drops for Excel file sheets that contain our data? And then 3 big pharma clients, you know, more than $150 billion in market cap asking you for this. And I'm like, unbelievable. Like, really, like this is the future really want? So yes, like, can you integrate it with your partners? Like, yeah, like absolutely. It's no brainer. You see, I mean, I think this is a very big problem, disconnect between really all this great science and actually what people want to use and what actually unlocks the value. We don't ask this question our clients. We're headed towards. What is it that really unlocks it? And sometimes it's about mundane, stupid things. You see, and that's the most shocking part, also to me. And that was also the part which was our journey of finding our fit.
So the common thread then for tips on getting started: frustration, opportunity leads to the creation of good ideas and good businesses.
There's probably one thing to add, I think, which probably hasn't been covered. I mean, you can find your market opportunity, you can analyze your data, you can make sure you've got something that looks like competitive advantage in your technology, and come up with a plan. But I think you have to take risk as well. And one of the things that I think that people sort of forget is that if your technology business looks like it's going to work first time round at the beginning of your journey, with absolute certainty, you're probably not innovating. You're probably doing something that's already been done.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean,
so at the start of many businesses' journeys, they've reached a point where the concept has been proven or developed enough, and they reach a point where they start looking at funding. And one of my favorite quotes in relation to funding is, the best time to seek investment is when investors are knocking on your door and you don't need their money. What are your thoughts on that, Max? When is the best time to go out and start looking for investors?
Well, it's definitely not when you're about to run out of money. That is, I think, universal. Let's put it this way. It's quite weird when a company that has just raised a funding round comes out and says, actually, I'm now raising the next round. Would you look at me? And so, you know, it's a game that, you know, one needs to play very carefully, and many startups are quite good at it because they go and talk to investors with the view to the next funding round, which we're going to be raising in 12 or 18 months time. But I really sort of want to get your views on that. And if they can get that engagement, maybe from the previous round, you often see investors getting excited a lot earlier and offering sort of next round terms well ahead of that timeline. And of course, raising in those situations makes sense. But it's not very common that people will offer, you know, tomorrow's price today, and therefore it's always a game of balancing the two things. You know, the safety of having more capital in your bank account versus the maximization of your commercial milestones and therefore the valuation that you can bring to business. And in today's world, I think the pendulum has swung to cash is king, and you know, more cash is better, even if it does mean a bit more dilution now. And the safety of being funded and not having to raise in 12 months time when the funding environment might be worse than today is a good thing. And I think that's what a lot of businesses are now trying to do, and finding their investors and other investors in the market relatively receptive to that, because I think, you know, everybody appreciates why that makes sense.
Absolutely. Mark, thoughts? When should you seek funding?
Well, your motivation as a chief executive or as a management team is obviously different to your shareholders. I mean, shareholders want to come in ideally before there is a massive inflection in the value of your business. So if you can hold out for as long as possible, and remembering, you know, as a business, you obviously want to develop great tech and you know, make a difference to the world. But ultimately, if you're going to have economic shareholders, then your job is there to make a return for those shareholders as well. And so finding the right time for them is important. But for an individual's management team and for capitalizing a business, the factors are quite different. One of the things that I've sort of took, perhaps more so from my IP Group days, is there's a balance between capital efficiency and overcapitalizing the business. And actually, if you overcapitalize the business, you know, you can become a little bit lethargic, and I think that's unhealthy. I think at the same time, if you're too capital efficient and too lean, you don't have optionality. And you know, business environment when you're in tech inevitably involves twists, turns, and you know, needing to reassess how the environment is changing. And you know, the recent pandemic is a perfect example of that. Who'd have thought back in sort of November, December time that, you know, people would be sitting at home in their entirety, and that there would be no travel at all. Perhaps those looking into China could see it coming, but prior to that, you know, so the ability to adapt is enabled by having some capital. So I think it's sort of never too early to look for some, but it's the question of how much capital do you take and on what basis do you take it? And those are the sort of drivers that I tend to think about.
It's just Ray here, just one thing. I think if you're a manager, shareholder or founder, things are a little bit different from being a management team, and because you might put up with a bit of extra pain or potentially even risk as a manager because you personally won't get diluted down with another fundraise. I think that's quite a big, I noticed that a big factor between managers who come into a company that's been around for a while and maybe only have, you know, share options or 1 or 2% of the business. They behave quite differently to someone who's got 50% of the business. So I think that's quite an important driving factor. But in terms of timing for fundraising and linking to Mark's point about optionality, I think having optionality on fundraising is a good thing to have. So maybe having a couple of irons in the fire, a fundraising sort of angle spiel conversation going with a sort of 3 to 6 month time horizon, and another one going with a 1 to 2 year time horizon with different people. And then you've got a bit of more flexibility of playing the game Max mentioned, which is, you know, so I will be raising funds in a year or two from you, possibly. Let's talk about it. And if they're prepared to provide the funds on the terms you might get in a year, a higher price, now you might let them in earlier. But meanwhile, you've got another bunch of people who you're talking to with a bit more shorter time horizon where you might be ready to take the funds because something strange might happen. And I think this idea of blurring, having two concurrent fundraising rounds in place is not a bad idea. And also at the same time having a third, which is talking to existing investors about what they might want to do if either of those two others don't work out, or if you want to prolong them a bit longer. So I think there's I don't think, I'm not so strong a believer in going out for a fundraising round in this timescale, this point. I think keeping it a bit more optional, as Mark said, or flexible is a good play. And it's even more so if you own a large slice of the company yourself, because you want to maximize every single share you sell. You want to get a good amount from it, from a good person.
Very easy to just point to sort of investment as a source of money as well. And of course, investment is a sort of proxy for the value of your business, but a paying customer is also a proxy to the value of your business. There are plenty of non-dilutive sources of money. So I think for whatever choice or whatever sort of business you are and the circumstances, it's different. But perhaps if you're starting in early stage tech, there are some really great schemes available that allow experienced tech investors to invest in your business. Probably tax efficiently, but you also from that relationship can garner great experience and know-how from those individuals.
Absolutely. You made a really good point there, Mark, about revenue as a very good source of income outside of investment. Fiona, you Repositive work with some really big pharma clients. How do you, as a startup in the tech space, particularly working in a really risk-adverse sector, how do you build credibility and bring in those big clients to get that revenue in place?
I have to sort of preamble my answer with, I don't know what you do if you start from scratch during a time when nobody goes out to conferences, because you need to meet them first in the first instance. I guess now you can meet them via video conferencing, but so I can only talk to the way we've done it. So how you would do it now might be slightly different, but how we've done it is that we've been very good at building relations with the kind of customers that were our target, both on the supplier side, the contract research organizations, as well as the biopharma. We met them in person where we could. We would go to the conferences where they would be most concentrated, so that we could meet many of them within the short within a short scope of time. And then to close them in sales, what we did with the large biopharma customers was we would always do a partnership first, which would be very low risk to them, but they would get to know us, they would get to know our services. We've tried both partnerships where that would come at no cost to them, but also there would be a high value to us in engaging with them, because we would learn more about how to make our product even more valuable. And we've also done pilots where they've been paying for a pilot where we actually did a piece of work which had some value, and they paid a price for that, but the price was sort of very low compared to what it would cost them to do it from scratch. And you said as a pilot saying, well, if we can deliver this pilot during this time, then at the end of this pilot, then you are committing to then go on to an actual full contract, so to speak. And if you can set up such an agreement with a biopharma and you get to the point where that pilot agreement is signed, then there's a very high chance that you can then close the larger contract or subscription contract, as it was in our case. You just have to be mindful that the bigger the organization you're trying to sell to, the longer it takes to get through these procurement processes. Oh my goodness, it could take a long time.
Really. I think a lot of the panelists have felt that pain before. I'll go on some questions quickly that have been coming in from some of the audience members. We had a question for Mark, Ray and Max. How easy is it to float and exit a business through the alternative investment market through AIM? Ray, obviously Bango, AIM listed. Can you talk us about that process a little bit?
Yeah, actually it dates back to about November 2004 when we had term sheets from, I think, various people. I want to see, Index Ventures was one of them. I remember that was quite an interesting one. And we were looking to go ahead with choosing one of those term sheets to proceed with. And someone came along with this crazy idea of why don't you offer shares on AIM? We thought, well, that's a bit of a funny idea. And Turned out we thought it was good. Turned out to be a very good move, because the dilution was about the same, and the initial dilution and the amount of money was probably a little bit more, but it meant that we ran our business. We weren't beholden to what we told some VCs to do, and we didn't have they wanted to get more and more of the business if it was successful, whereas AIM was a little bit different. And so you have to get your timing right, and you have to do a good job when you're on AIM and so on. But the actual mechanics of going through to get onto AIM turned out to be not too bad, although there was a bit of a congestion, because there were some new EU rules coming in at the end of June in 2005. We had to get in before that happened, but the prospectus directive or something like that. But yeah, it was fine, and I've seen a number of AIM companies going onto AIM recently, and over the last few years, I've invested in a couple have gone onto AIM, and the process actually is relatively straightforward. I think the biggest thing is knowing if you're going to go into it, knowing that you have to go into it with your eyes open. First of all, you have to keep you have to tell the truth to the outside world, not just your VCs. So that's a bit of a challenge if you're trying to create an aura and a myth around your company. The problem is everyone can see your finances, so it's quite hard to tell lies, where most private companies tell a pack of lies to make progress. And so you can't lie anymore, really. And then secondly, you have to just watch out that you have the right sort of investors, have the right sort of story, and it can be reasonably hard work. But that it's the same with almost any source of funding. You need to look after your investors, but they're different types of investors. So it's been very good for us, and I've known a number of companies have been very good for. On the other hand, you can get ground into the ground if you make a few missteps, and I've been on NASDAQ as well, and I think NASDAQ's magnified that. You can really fall out of favor very, very quickly if you're not careful. Really,
Mark, has that mirrored your experience?
I think our experience is slightly different. I mean, the first thing is that you started the sentence by saying you sort of float your business and it's an exit. I don't think a float on AIM is an exit. That's the first thing. It's an opportunity to provide liquidity to some of your shareholders in your stock. It is a mechanism for sourcing a different group of investors. So institutional investors that would invest in AIM are probably quite different to the investors, not necessarily different in terms of their characteristic traits, but the sources of money, the way they keep their money, the way they manage their money is different to those that would invest in a private business. Everyone's got the same class of share, so you're all equally motivated to do well, and there's no layering or ratchets or any of that sort of stuff. And finally, I think one of the things that is attractive is it provides a wider base for investors. So you're not just sort of bound by the kind of institution and VC investing community. It gives a whole bunch of people the opportunity to have some exposure to your type of business. If they research the business well, and they can invest, they can buy in, they can sell out, and so on and so forth. But I think for us, the attraction of AIM was that it was a source of capital. But actually, in a business which is evolving, where tech is evolving all the time, we don't have a monopoly on the one piece of technology that will disrupt an industry. And I saw one of the questions that's kind of come through on the panel here is, what niche technology in the AI and ML space is exciting and would most accelerate a drug and discovery? There's no one piece of technology. And we've used our AIM-listed paper to acquire businesses which provide us with an aggregate better offering to the pharmaceutical industry. So we developed some tech in Glasgow in the first instance that was funded privately. That became part of an AIM-listed business, but we've done 2 acquisitions along the way using our listed paper, which probably we wouldn't have been able to do as a private business. And ultimately that's allowed us to sort of grow our footprint, access better technology, and therefore be able to provide a more attractive offering to the pharma industry as a tech business. So my view on AIM is I'm positive on it. It does come with some challenges as well, and as Ray rightly pointed out, you have to communicate to the markets consistently. You have to be transparent, and you have to kind of not get caught up in what I would call a sort of, inappropriate speculation.
A great answer. We've got some very spicy questions coming in, particularly Joe Parry's question. Joe, apologies, we're running a bit short on time, but what I will say is you've got the LinkedIn profile links for all of our panelists. They'll be emailed out to you after this call, so feel free to connect with any of us via LinkedIn, and we'll be able to answer any additional queries. We are running short on time. I want to ask one closing question, which is, given the current situation that we all find ourselves in, I won't name it, there's people being furloughed. There's been an influx of individuals out there that are looking to start a tech business. With this in mind, can you just give us one closing comment about what advice you would give somebody to get started? Ray, what advice can you give somebody?
I would say, well, first of all, asking an old fart like me who's been around too long what you should do when you're starting, and my advice is probably terribly out of date. So that's one problem. So don't ask me. But if you had to ask me, I think one of the things I would say, and also it's because of my simple mind, I would say this is, if you're going to start a business, be very sure you can explain what it is to other people in quite a nice, easy, motivating but simple way, because if you're going to start a business, you'll need other people to join you, I think, as either investors or possibly even customers or people in your team. And if you can have a reasonably good way of describing what you're going to be doing that lasts a reasonable amount of time, I think that's probably one of the most important things. Don't be confused about what you're doing. If you are being confused about what you're doing, pretend you're not confused by having a very simple way of describing what you're doing that can enlist everybody to back you and support you or reject you as quickly as possible in the first few months.
Fantastic point. Camille, new kid on the block, what's your advice?
Look, I'm a physics bot with no, so for me, it's basically studying the market very well. I mean, coronavirus just breaks the market. So it will expose the weakest links. And if you focus only on pharmaceutical vertical, you can identify weakest links in supply chains to clinical trials, which means every single thing where the weakest link is basically idea for a business.
It's a great point. Great point. Max, any tips?
Well, first of all, entrepreneurship is not for everyone, and that's the first question that anyone needs to ask themselves. You know, am I prepared to go on the journey? Do I have real passion for something to do it? Because it's not a job that you're doing for money. It needs to be more than that. And if you're not doing it for more than that, then you probably won't succeed. Secondly, downturns in general, and this one in particular, are fantastic times. And this time is more fantastic than others because the technology ecosystem is not broken. The financing ecosystem is not broken. Yet the world has gone through a tremendous shakeup, as Camille was saying, and those opportunities. Big businesses are not responding to that with anything like the speed that is required, and the behavioral changes are incredibly deep and very rapid, which we've never ever seen before, and that creates a ginormous number of opportunities. And lastly, you know, don't chase the investors too much. You know, that shouldn't be the starting point. It's not the game to raise as much as possible. You can do a hell of a lot on sweat equity, build your product, bring in fantastic advisors who have been there, done that before. And you can actually get very, very far before you have to raise the first dime into your business. And so focus on that, and focus on kind of the product proposition and getting to product market fit as soon as possible to demonstrate some value in the company before you really go out to raise, if you can.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mark, how do I get started?
Be brave and surround yourself with great people, albeit probably at 2 meter social distancing.
A good social distancing comment within the strat. I like it. Fiona, how can we get started? What's your advice?
I would say get started in a way that as soon as you found, you have decided this is the customer you want to serve and this is the product you want to deliver to them, try to do it in the fastest possible way so that you don't overthink it, don't overbuild it, don't over-design it, don't try to perfect it. Just get it out there, because the sooner you hear whether they will buy it or not, or they tell you they don't want it, the sooner you can shift your business plan to something that will be more successful in the future.
Fail fast, fail often. It's the classic mantra that we see. Thank you so much for your time today, panel. Fantastic responses. And to all of our audience out there, thank you for the great questions. From our perspective, O2h Technology, we're supporting many companies during this time as well. We've got our free products out there. And as I mentioned at the start of this conversation, we're aiding in building businesses every day. So this advice has been invaluable across our clients, across our portfolio, but also for everyone else out there. Closing remarks then. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks again to our panelists. I hope that everyone can join us for next week's ChaiTime webinar. It's going to be taking place on Friday at the usual time next week, Friday the 15th of May, 3 p.m. BST. We're going to be joined by a very special guest chair for next week's session, Dr. Andy Richards, CBE, who really needs no introduction. He's been involved in pretty much all of the big success stories to come out of Cambridge. So that's going to be a great session. He's going to be chairing a Q&A discussion with 4 of the O2h-backed human health companies, StemNovate, Small Pharma, Aracor, and Turbine, which are all considering a Seed Plus or Series A funding round in the near future. So hopefully you can join us next week. Thanks again to everyone. All of our attendees, you're going to receive an email after this session with my contact details, with the panelists' contact details. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions today, so please reach out, get in touch to us, and we'll carry on the conversation moving forward. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe out there, and we'll all speak soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.